Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on Zoom tonight at Venture Cafe for another artist studio tour. My name is Angela McQuillan and I'm the curator of the Esther Klein Gallery, which is part of the Science Center, which is also home to Venture Cafe. So I'm really excited today to have artist Deirdre Murphy as our guest. I first met Deirdre in 2018 when she did a 3-month-long residency at Integral Molecular, a biotech company located at U City Square, in collaboration with the University City Science Center BioArt Residency program. Deirdre worked closely with scientists at Integral to develop a new body of work based on biotechnology that was displayed in her solo exhibition, Oculus, at Esther Klein Gallery in 2019. So I love working with Deirdre. Her work is so vibrant and colorful, just like her personality. And I'm really excited to get a closer look inside her studio practice and see her new works in progress. Now, an official introduction. Deirdre Murphy earned her MFA from the University of Pennsylvania and her BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute. She's a visiting assistant professor at Lehigh University and also taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Drexel University, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. Deirdre has been a visiting artist at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Pennsylvania College of Design, and University of Texas, Philadelphia University, Kent State University, and Dickinson College. Deirdre is represented by the Gross McLeaf Gallery in Philadelphia, the Box Hart Gallery in Pittsburgh, and Zinc Contemporary Gallery in Seattle. So I'd now like to welcome Deirdre Murphy.
Well, thank you so much, Angela, for that wonderful introduction and for hosting me on this virtual studio tour. So what I'd like to do is share my screen. I'm going to just give you guys about a 10-15 minute kind of presentation of what I have been up to in really the last year, and currently what the work is about in quarantine, because there is definitely a shift happening. So let me just share my screen here with you. There we go. Okay. Good. Are we good? Everybody can see this?
Yeah.
All right. So as Angela was saying, I'm a painter, and for the last decade or so, my work has really been research heavy onto bird migration and the effects of climate change with the migratory patterns. So collaborating with scientists in the field of ornithology and biology has really been an exciting arm to my studio practice. Artists and scientists are keen observers of the seen and unseen world. I primarily was interested in the seen world through birds and the natural world that we see, but I realized that I needed to make a shift, and that shift was then going into the unseen world. And artists and scientists share different attributes. We share the love of problem solving. We are creative thinkers. We rely heavily on our intuition to guide us. We're innovative problem solvers and thinkers, and we have an innate sense of curiosity. So the BioArt Residency that I was gifted, really, because it truly was a gift, it really was life-changing. There at Integral Molecular, I was privileged enough to look in the microscope and to study the viruses and the protein structures on the viruses. And I was able to collaborate with these scientists looking at the unseen world, the world that's not visible to our eyes. My studio, which is typically in my basement home or out in the field, then became the studio bench of the laboratory. So I worked, you could see from the smile on my face, I was so excited every day to be there. It was new discoveries made by the scientists and new discoveries to be visualized by myself in the lab. So this was really my setup. And I would go in and I would observe. And I wanted to see, my premise for the BioArt Residency was, are there similar patterns in nature that exist in the seen world in the unseen world. What am I going to discover that might have similarities or dissimilarities? So my premise was quite open-ended. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to discover. While in the residency, I was still working on my bird migration paintings, and these paintings were looking at how birds migrate. Songbirds migrate at night. They migrate with the stars so that they're not picked off and eaten by the hawks. So they're not bird brains at all. They're quite intelligent beings. And so I soon realized that what I was looking for during the BioArt Residency was searching for the cosmos or the constellation patterns within us, within our bodies. So instead of looking through the oculus of the telescope, I was now looking through the oculus of the microscope and looking at the cloud nebulas and the different formations that I saw in the microscope. The solar eclipse had happened just a year before my residency, and that was, as we all know, a really profound experience to see this enormous, powerful circle in the sky. And I think that, in hindsight, had a lot to do with this entire body of work. So here you can see in tandem with working in the lab, this is some of the sculpture that my husband and I, Scott, were working on, looking at the migratory star patterns, the constellation patterns. So here's looking through the telescope, now looking through the microscope. So I realized this is a light pollution map of Europe, but when I looked in the microscope at integral molecular, I saw the viruses transfecting, and when they transfected, it looked like a startling resemblance to light pollution maps. And that was an aha moment for me, because then there was the constellation pattern, but it was the light pollution pattern. There was the tie-in with bird migration, because the light pollution that is happening, that is warming our climate and brightening the skies at night, it oftentimes, it confuses the birds, and they actually fly off track sometimes in heavily polluted areas. And so I said, oh my gosh, here's the hook. So then in the off days when I wasn't in the lab, I would then come back to studio and do these drawings. So this was the beginning of the Oculus series. So I had my Petri dish studies, and now I'm making the works on paper with the light pollution maps, and then those confetti lines are the bird migration data of birds that are flying then over Europe. So you can see England, the light pollution map of Italy. Now, all the while, I'm not making any sort of connection to the current pandemic. I'm not thinking about viruses in such a literal way. I am looking at how birds know no boundaries, and they fly over any country, and viruses know no boundaries. They go where they want to go. I'm also looking at the cells in the lab and the flow cytometry, those beautiful images, which I think the scientists called avocados, I saw as bird murmurations or flocks of birds flying in the tens of thousands. And so this is Oculus Minor. It's a 15-foot acrylic painting on paper. And of course, I had to pay homage to Sir Isaac Newton with the color spectrum, because I am a lover of color and the science of color and the science of seeing. And so what I did was, before I started, you can see Oculus Minors on the ground. This is one of my teaching studios. And then you can see Oculus Major on the wall there. I did an underpainting or glazing of deeply saturated colors so that I could have that rainbow of Roy G. Biv, right? I could have that color spectrum. I wanted the colors to be embedded in each of the paintings, but I wanted to unify them with the color black. So each of the paintings is a black color, but black is not the absence of color. Black is all colors absorbed into themselves. And so it is incredibly rich, like when you look into the night sky and you see that luscious velvet black. So this is the North and South America light pollution map with the Milky Way that then turns into the dendritic arms of the cell clusters that then turns into the stars, the singular stars. Moving then into the orange spectrum, we have the bird migration pattern in the black lines and the cellular pattern coming across. Italy is lit up. In hindsight, looking at this particular piece, it's quite chilling to me how knowing that Italy was one of the hot spots of COVID-19, and this painting in particular resonates very differently with me now. And I'm seeing how I am the daughter of a scientist, a brilliant scientist, Dr. Martin Murphy. He's a hematologist oncologist, and he has warned us about the pandemic for about the last 30 years. And every year during influenza season or leading up to it, he makes sure that we're all vaccinated and all of our children are vaccinated. So this idea of a pandemic on the horizon has really been common knowledge in our family. But I didn't realize how it was going to manifest in my paintings until now. So you can see different light pollution maps. The Milky Way is forever present, and then this ebb and flow of the Japanese cosmic soup that we all exist in, and that kind of connectedness to us all. The green is a Chinese landscape, and it's the view of the River Lee and the 1,000 views of the River Lee. And the phosphorescent dots are the fireflies. When I lived in Japan in June, late June, early July, we'd go out when the fireflies first came out in the kind of the peak of summer. And we would celebrate the Hotaru by having a picnic at night and watching this phosphorescent kind of dance of lights in the sky. So these are the fireflies, the phosphorescence in the sky that then turn into the viral protein markers and then into the stars. So now you can see the installation at Esther Klein Gallery with Oculus Minor on the right and Oculus Major on the left. And again, here's just some underpainting just to show you how I'm building these structures, how I'm glazing them. So there's many, many layers of black to give that rich kind of lacquer that you'll see in a lot of Asian work. So I started Oculus Major. Instead of starting with a light pollution map, I really wanted to go back to the core of the essential sphere or the most powerful circle that I could think of, and that's really the moon. Because whenever there's a full moon, it always gives us pause. From the caves of Lascaux to present, it has a very powerful pulling force, arresting kind of force on humanity. So this then starts with the full moon and the Luna moth having the dots on her back to protect herself, knowing that a dot pattern can ward off her predators. So now you can see a little bit of change from Oculus Minor to Oculus Major, where the ideas are really starting to develop and come into fruition. Lots and lots, hundreds of thousands of dots I had a wonderful studio assistant, Sydney Bendeski, help me paint those multitude of dots. The blood moon is another, now in hindsight thinking, nod to Corona, to the power of what we are now in the pandemic, and the global connection that we all have is, for me, the takeaway of this painting, how we not only need to take care of each other and our families and our neighbors, but we really need to take care of the globe. We are citizens of the world. We travel, and this is just, the painting really has it resonates with me in a very different way now in quarantine. And I can more clearly see the narrative and why I actually made this painting a year ago. And I think for artists, sometimes we don't really know what the work is about until we've made it and until we've had a little bit of hindsight to be able to see clearly. And so this talk has really helped me to put to words what I have been feeling about this work now in quarantine. So again, we're ending Oculus Major on the Chinese landscape with a juvenile Luna moth and the phosphorescence. So this part of these paintings, the paintings, you know, the Oculus Major is 26 feet, but it can be shown as diptychs and triptychs. So this diptych is currently at the Lehigh University Art Gallery, where I teach. And then there's some other smaller paintings that pair with it. And then you can see this is Ursa Major, a 44-inch cell sky dome that is now, let's see, it just came back from the Zillman Art Museum in Maine. And there's Scott adjusting it. And here we have the Oculus Minor on view in Maine. Then Oculus, that body of work is finished. But the residency has been, you know, finished and culminated in that show. But the idea of looking through this round portal is still with me. So last summer, I did a residency at the Winterthur Museum as a Maker Creator Fellow. And I was looking through some of their portals, going back to plein air painting. And that then led to this idea of the telescopes and thinking about getting back to my roots of plein air painting. And so in this painting, you're able to see, this is Cabin in the Woods. You're able to see around the black Oculus there is the night scene with the stars coming out. And then through the portal, you're able to see the day scene. This is Cabin by the Lake. Now, again, thinking about myself and all of us in quarantine, how we are in isolation, but we artists and we scientists love our solitude. The solitude of the laboratory or the solitude of the studio, and that going within and asking those questions and having that quiet and having that research time can be one of the most creative and productive times. So I think a lot of artists are finding creativity during the quarantine. And this painting in particular is one about not isolation, which is really put upon us and can be quite depressing, but it's that idea of solitude. And so in quarantine, I have found myself needing to turn to nature and of course turning to strength of family, so that kind of the warmth of the dwelling. But in quarantine, and we really have been strictly quarantined, I try not to come into contact with other people. And so I've been having to look for different landscapes where I can paint in solitude and have that plein air experience. So this leads me to my current work, the current paintings, which are the pandemic plein air paintings. So I found another Oculus, and it's these tunnels, these storm drain culverts. They almost look like sewer drains or sewer pipes, but I hike out and find myself inside these tunnels that allow me to have this Oculus of the landscape, and it truly is the light at the end of the tunnel. And the juxtaposition of the graffiti, of that kind of the urban, gritty, the everyday artwork that pedestrians do, that I think is quite magnificent. And so this is what I have been doing for the last 11 weeks in quarantine, is schlepping out into the woods to find these tunnels and to paint these new vistas and to meditate in these portals and think about how during the pandemic, if we all join hands, that it brings out the best in humanity, and that we really do need each other, and that nature is always going to be there for us. Nature is that constant. And so these really become these meditations that I have been quite obsessed with. And so this is what my setting looks like. So on a given day, I'll be out here and in search of new tunnels, new portals, new Oculuses. Here's my children helping with masked up, of course. Everybody please wear your masks, right? So we're on with masks looking for these fabulous places to paint. And then I take them home so that I can paint in solitude. And then in tandem to those portal paintings, I'm still in studio doing work that are studio paintings, going back to that idea of the moon, the bird migration, and then the idea of solitude and returning to nature, just finding that kind of cyclical ebb and flow of life. So there you have it, my current work and the last year's work.
Thank you, Deirdre. That's a really beautiful piece right there as well. Is that new?
Thank you. That is, yes. And those will be shown at Boxheart Gallery in October in Pittsburgh. So all of that work will be there.
I really love how you're able to have like this portable studio.
Yes.
Like out in these tunnels, but also I feel like when you were doing your residency at Integral, you were bringing, you know, your whole little kit. You had your little panels and all your inks and stuff. So I just love the way that you're kind of just able to set up, because you were kind of doing plein air microscope paintings, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely. I think responding to my visual world is extremely exciting because there's always a new discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, the plein air lab paintings, I didn't think about it that like that. You're right, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, you know, you have this Oculus setup that you are now using in your paintings. Were you making constellation maps before you came to the lab? Kind of feel like that's so serendipitous, because if you look at any book that has constellation maps, they're all in this circle.
Yeah, that was right around the time of the BioArt Residency. And I think truly it was looking in the microscope through that Oculus. You know, everything is spherical or circular. And so that really, that synergy kind of brought it together there.
So just to let everyone know, when you look into a microscope, everything is dark and the cells are illuminated, which is why they kind of look like these light maps. Did this series of your Oculus series kind of influence your use of black in your paintings?
Yes, absolutely. So I always choose a new color challenge. I think, you know, being an academic, being a teacher, you know, I'm always giving myself a set of challenges or new territory to lean into. And so the color black was a color that I always kind of shied away from. I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. It's a very powerful color. You know, Mars, the god of war, you know, is, there's just, you know, you always think of, there's the Mars pigment, which is this really dense black. So I always shied away from it, but Matisse used black so beautifully. And of course, you know, in Japanese artwork, there's abundance of the use of black. And I always teach students how to create their own blacks using, you know, a recipe of 2 to 3 different colors together, to mix those together to then create black. So I thought, well, let's have that be my challenge. And because I saw so much black in the microscope, that really gave me the perfect opportunity to take a deep dive into the color black. And I wanted to make sure that there was a temperature or a color family like well seated within each of the blacks, that it was never black right out of the tube.
Mm-hmm. Is that generally frowned upon to use black out of the tube?
I mean, I think
personal preference.
In early, you know, kind of academic painting 1-2 level, yes. You know, they want the, you know, I always want my students to know how to mix it, but then, you know, I think you can, you know, I certainly use it right out of the tube as well, but I think that there's a certain richness or luminosity that you get when you layer the black, the colors, you know, together.
Definitely. And I noticed you kind of get that too. I'm interested in like the underpainting
Mhm.
techniques you're using in the paintings behind you. You have all
Oh,
these different
yes.
color backgrounds.
Definitely. So again, I think that's, I always try and pose a color question that's going to kind of throw me for a loop, that's going to challenge me and push my understanding of what color can do. So yeah, in these, I put a yellow background, or a ground as we call it in painting language, and then a pink one. And what it does is when I mix that green and put it on top, or that blue, optically, those colors are going to read differently, and they're going to vibrate or have that simultaneous contrast. So, our eyes are going to trigger a different kind of color relationship. And so I think that's why I put those different color grounds down.
Hmm. Does anyone have any questions for Deirdre before I ask some more?
Yeah. Were you naturally a gifted artist, or did you have to like take lessons to learn how to paint, I guess, professionally?
That's a great question, Nathan. So I always have drawn. My parents, if they're, I don't even know if they're on this, but they can attest to the fact that I always had a stub of crayon in my hand. And so I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And I think that, my family was wonderful to provide lessons for me at a young age. And then I definitely applied myself, and just worked and worked and worked at it. But I think that as an art educator, that just given that kind of rigor and discipline of just practice, that you can draw, you can paint, and that anybody can do it. And as a teacher, I love bringing that out in my students.
And are there such a thing as art tutors that can teach you individually, give you specialized
Yes.
attention?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, you can have private lessons or small group lessons.
I have a
Thank you.
question. How do you mount your paintings on the wall?
So the paintings on paper, the Oculus Minor series, I mounted those with an archival PVA, polyvinyl acetate glue. I then adhered them to a high-end birch plywood, and then that on the back of that birch plywood, there's a French cleat, so that they could just hover and float off the wall, and they don't need to be framed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you want to show us around your studio a little bit?
Sure. Let's see if I can do this with any sort of, gosh, I should have gotten out my sheep brain. I just put my sheep brain away, you guys. I'm
So for
teaching.
anyone who just tuned in.
Yeah. So let's see. So this is that in focus there, hopefully?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so you can kind of see the underpainting here, and I rarely show works in progress, so you guys are getting a real sneak peek. I'm always pretty shy to show work in progress. So you can see it's really, really rough. This is only two goes at these paintings where I put the pink ground down, then I went out and I literally just with, you can kind of see with pencil, just sketched it on. Then this one, I'm actually trying acrylic underpainting because, I'm in this tunnel and I'm like, kind of in a pretzel position trying to paint in this awkward space.
Is that because the
And
oil paint takes a lot longer to dry?
it does.
Yeah.
Yes. And so just transporting them back and forth. Although I believe now they will become studio paintings, because I'm finding that more and more people are coming out now. And even though I'm painting with my mask on and it's getting really warm, I just, I either need to get up at the crack of dawn, which I do anyway, but I think these are going to become studio paintings. So I'll have to take some good photos of my site. And then I don't know, this lighting is pretty wretched. I need a proper studio. Can you see, these are some small studies that I'm doing of the same site. So you can kind of get an idea there of what I'm up to.
I think it's pretty interesting the way that you're working on all these pieces simultaneously. Like you don't just go with one painting and do one painting. You have like 5 going on at the same
Yeah,
time.
true. This, they feed off of one another. So I typically, I don't know, you can kind of see I've got, let's see if you can see there's my,
Right.
my palette. And then, I've got a blank painting there up on an easel, but most of my work is on the wall. Underneath this painting, the Luna moth, is a 7-foot piece of paper. This right here is an enormous star chart drawing for a commission that Scott and I have for the Temple University Charles Library. So we're building a 7-foot sky dome for Temple University. It is delayed because of the pandemic, but we're hopefully now going to get started back on that again. And so this 7-foot drawing will then go be wrapped around a 7-foot dome. And that'll be then installed for the beginning of the academic year in September. So that's underneath all this, but then this painting here, I actually did a small one of this at the lab during the BioArt Residency, and then I thought that it had enough merit that it should become a larger painting. So you can kind of see, but nobody's seen this in Philly because it went right to Maine. So that's
And you do have a real Luna moth, right? That you're
Oh,
painting from?
I do. Yes, yes, you could see my this is my crazy little basement studio. Anybody want to if anybody knows of a proper studio, I need to get out of my basement.
Now though, during the pandemic, you don't have to leave your home.
This
Oh,
is true.
there it is.
Yeah, and the Chinese opera mask, thanks to my my mom and dad that work in China quite a bit. So you can see my various inspirations. And like I said, I have a sheep brain, but I think I'll just keep that lovely little beauty tucked away because I'm teaching this summer. I'm co-teaching a class with Dr. Jennifer Swan, who's writing a book on brain neuroanatomy. And so I'm teaching the visual end of it. And we have 2 wonderful medical illustration students that are going to be illustrating her book chapters. And so today it was dissection of the sheep brain. We all got our Amazon package in the mail, our dissection kit, and we learned how to do the initial cuts into a sheep brain so that we could draw them. So it's a very exciting.
Was this all through Zoom?
Yeah, we did it all through Zoom this morning. Yes, it was very exciting.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so I didn't do my pandemic plein airs. I was just dissecting sheep brains. It's a wonderful life, I tell you. An interesting one, at least.
Did it give
I
you
have a
some
question for you, Deirdre.
Hi, Naz.
Hi. First of all, wonderful. Thank you so much for that great overview of your work. And I love the pandemic paintings.
Thank you.
I really like seeing them in progress, and I like that they're rougher because it creates a mood and gives me a sense of kind of what you are working with. Can you just talk a little about how do you know when it's done?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? I am really trying to force myself to keep it loose and keep that pattern open. So I think I'll be asking you probably for help in is it done or when to put the brush down, because I tend to overwork my paintings. And that I think, is never a good thing. So I do have trouble knowing when to stop. Sometimes the light bulb goes on and I'm like, okay, it's done. But a lot of times, that's a tough call. But so for me right now, I'm actually going to try and that's probably to your point too, Angela, why I have multiple works going on simultaneously so that I don't overwork one painting.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you're not doing plein air work, do you make sketches or plan out your paintings like pretty thoroughly, or are you more intuitive?
Well, like with the plein air paintings right now, I'm going out, and like literally this is, I'm sketching them out, just to figure out composition, although they need to change. Like I realize I need to actually have the Oculus actually come in more so you can get that tunnel effect, because I realize I don't have this tunnel effect yet.
Oh.
So like I use the sketches as a responsive kind of looking at the composing of the images. So this is, the other view at the other end of the tunnel. So I use them that way, but then sometimes, it's more of, just generating ideas like, this isn't yet, but then, I've been trying to go out and walk or run every morning. And in the beginning of the pandemic, the bird nests were, really apparent because it was the, kind of the cold of spring. So it was more like the winter nest. And so I'll just do quick sketches like that. And then they're going to turn into a wood block, so I'll make it into a print. And I'm also trying to do, little I don't have a press in my studio, so I have to do hand printed. So this will be a little engraving, or a dry point etching. So I definitely, sometimes they become a painting, but other times, it's just musing or sketching.
It's interesting because those to me kind of look like neurons.
Yes, don't they? I know.
And I know you're going into this brain study, so I feel like you're just like, I don't know, your work is like ahead of your life almost,
It is. Yeah, I know. Like I found this hawk nest on a run one morning, and it was a hawk nest. You can't even tell. This is like a really, like, it's horrible. I can't even believe I'm showing you this, but it's like this crazy like mess of sticks. I really I want to understand like how the engineering of bird nests is my next query. But then, yeah, and I'm looking at all these neurons and axons and things like that. And so they're, so now I'm just like, sometimes in the morning, I'll just wake up and I'll do a little nest drawing, and I'm thinking about the brain. It's crazy.
That's really
It's
interesting.
pretty awesome. And what's neat too, I was thinking in my show at Pittsburgh, I might have to actually record what I hear when I'm out painting, because the sound of the birds and the canopy of the trees changes. Like right now it's brooding season, so they've mated and now they're raising their young, and like what they're saying to each other in that canopy of the trees is so different. So I was like, I might have to have an auditory kind of a track in there too.
Yeah. So you spent a lot of time studying birds in another residency, right?
Yes. Yeah. At Hawk Mountain, I did 2 residencies there, and then at Powder Mill, which is part of the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, I did a residency there. Yeah,
So
I love collaborating with scientists. I think scientists are so cool.
I can tell. And I feel like some of those bird migration paintings, a lot of the colors have something to do with like the bird data. Is that?
Yes, so I would definitely, and I really, like when I was at Integral Molecular, initially I thought that I would actually take more of the data from or my color palette from their data, or from their graphs and things like that. Although I found, I was like, why do you guys use red and green all the time? Like, why don't you use another set of complementary colors? Can we use like purple and yellow sometimes? And it was neat. So after the residency, I actually found like some of the scientists were like, you know what? I'm changing my
Oh,
graph
really?
Yeah. I was like, oh, that's so great.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great to hear, because I feel like these residencies shouldn't just be about artists coming in and learning science. They should be about, collaboration and both entities learning from each other. So, yeah. So your dad is a scientist, and you've spent a lot of time working with different scientists. How did you feel when you first started out in the lab at Integral?
Terrified.
Really?
They're all so smart. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was so excited, but it was that feeling of just like a kid in a candy store, but being so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful feeling. And I think what's so amazing about Integral Molecular is just how generous the scientists are, and warm, and just kind about sharing and explaining what they're doing, because I know quite a few of the BioArt residency artists, are dual degree. They have a background like yourself in science and in art, and I do not. So I think that's where my feeling of like inadequacy in the beginning are those nerves. But the scientists
Well,
were
it's like an alien place. So, you walk in and you don't know what anything is, and you don't know what anyone's talking about. So
yeah. But yeah, I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was fantastic, and clearly the experience produced I got a ton of work out of it, and I'm still really benefiting from the residency.
yeah. So did you spend time in your dad's lab as a child at all?
Yes. Pretty much, on Saturdays, because he'd always be working, the ever devoted scientist. So he would take, I'm one of 5, so he would take one of us and give
Wow.
my mom a bit of a break, and we'd go, into the lab. So I would sit there, and draw while he looked in the electron microscope.
I had the same experience. My parents were scientists too, so they always used to have to go in on weekends and like feed their cells or whatever they needed
That's right.
to do. So.
Yeah. Did you have a mouse as a pet too?
I did. I had a lot of mice, and they would always die from weird illnesses. So I don't know. I don't know what kind of disease they had.
Oh, yes. So we have a lot in common. There we go.
Yeah.
I have a
Anyone-
quick question.
Go ahead.
Who do you sell your artwork to? Is it galleries, I guess?
So I have 3 different galleries that represent me and sell my work. So it's definitely, it's a challenge. It's always, you make the work and then you want to find homes for it. So, and then the larger the work, the bigger the challenge. So I'm actively looking for homes for Oculus Major and Oculus Minor. But it's a wonderful feeling to actually place the work in a home or in an office, because then I really feel like once that work leaves my studio, it then breathes and has a life of its own, because the story then is continued on and enriched by its new home. So definitely selling the work, placing the work is a really important part of the practice, or the end of it. But I try not to focus too much on that, because if I do, then sometimes I make repetitive work, or work that I think that is sellable, versus work that's really research driven. But it's yes, it's the creative life.
You
So
do
how does that
portraits?
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask if she does portraits.
I have done portraits in the past.
So how does this artist residencies that you're doing, where you do a lot of research, how does that kind of align with your gallery practice?
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting one, because sometimes the subject matter might not align with specific galleries. So I find myself showing in different venues. So having the museum show, the Zillman Art Museum in Maine, that was wonderful, because I was able to take the Esther Klein show and then travel it to Maine, and I was able to then go back into the lab and do a second series of those Petri dish paintings for the main show, and then made new paintings from that. So sometimes it's looking for more museum settings or academic settings to exhibit the work. But then, I think the galleries are, that idea of art and science, I think is growing momentum. And so Box Art Gallery in Pittsburgh, I think that they're quite excited to show some of the Oculus work, as well as the pandemic plein airs. So it's kind of, I think we're growing together in the research.
And I wanted to say I really did like the different ways you displayed Oculus, the larger piece, the paintings. how you had them as a diptych or as a like a corner piece on the wall. I really thought that was interesting, how they can kind of be rearranged a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, I did think of that when I was creating them in that format so that they'd have versatility, because not everybody has a 26-foot wall, right? So
Are you trying to sell them all as one piece though, or are you
I
selling
really
them
would like to. I mean, I would love to see those paintings go to, you know, a biotech, pharma, um, even, you know, the CDC museum. I think that there's a really powerful narrative in those paintings, and that I'd love for them to be in the community of scientists, and to be able to kind of visually give back to the scientists as much as they give to us every day with their research. So I'm actively looking for the right home for those paintings. So anybody have any ideas, please let me know.
I have a
did-
question. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Hi. So what has, I've been in and out, so I don't know if this has already been asked or not. What has been your most challenging painting to work with, or and did you complete it, and what was the inspiration about it? Can you speak about that?
Well, I think Oculus Major, that the 26-foot painting, was my most challenging because it's the biggest painting I've ever made. And that each painting had to work individually as a unit. It's 6 panels. So I had to have 6 strong compositions that worked independently, and yet they all had to work together as an orchestrated unit. So I think that was one of my most challenging elements. And then the use of the color black, how to have that black not feel morbid, not feel oppressive, but to feel like that kind of awe that you have when you walk out into the dark night sky, and you feel this kind of comfort of like you're a speck in the universe, but it's like a humbling kind of comforting feeling of like you're part of this greater whole. And so that was a real challenge for me, to have the color black have that kind of openness and warmth, if you will. So it took a lot of trial and error.
Sure. No, I always try. I work for a biotech company, and I always try to take inspiration from artists, right? So today, what I saw, I'm heavily inspired. So thank you for your work and whatever you do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for attending. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? So I wanted to ask you about the collaborations you do with Scott. I know that for these big sky dome pieces, he's working in steel, and your design, like how does that collaboration work? What do you do, and then what does he do to make that work together?
Gotcha. So like with the temple commission, they knew the site that they wanted a piece to be installed. And so we went out there and we measured it, and then we do drawings back and forth literally at the kitchen table, and thinking about scale. I'll do drawings, like usually I like to have the drawings be site specific as well. So for the temple drawing, it'll be the spring sky or the fall sky, depending on what compositionally looks best. That'll be over Philadelphia. So what is the constellation pattern in autumn over Philadelphia? And so I'll do that kind of research and start to sketch those ideas out. And then all the while, Scott is really engineering. He has to engineer these wooden jigs that he hand shapes the metal. So none of it is digitally done at all. It's all done by hand. It looks so perfect that you think that it's machine made or laser cut, but it's not. It's all hand hewn. And so then he creates the wooden jig. He creates those bent steel or aluminum half domes, and then he gives it to me, and I hand draw every single dot, and I color code them depending on the aperture of the drill that needs to. So what size hole should be, like in the Milky Way, you're gonna have lots of little holes, and then you'll have larger ones for the the larger stars. So then I do a color coded drawing. So like the 7-foot drawing that I've got going on now, that'll be translated into a color coded drawing on the half dome. and then we get to drilling, and then I help him drill it out, help engrave the lines in. But he's really the heavy and everything 3D, and I'm 2D. I just kind of wrap it around, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Like, is the drawing like cut so that it fits in a dome shape?
Yeah, I make the drawing bigger than, because yes, yeah, you have to kind of fit the drawing to the 3-dimensional shape. So I started out 2D, but then eventually it does have to be kind of cut and fitted. But then by that point, I know the drawing so well that I don't like, use a projector and like project the drawing onto the sculpture. I just freehand it, and then I just draw again exactly what's in the drawing, but then on the sculpture itself.
Yeah. So when you talk about scale, this is 7 feet, and the last one you did was a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Are you making the dots bigger, or are you just putting way more constellations on it?
So there are going to be some bigger dots. The aperture is going to increase a little bit, but not tremendously. It's going to be just more dots. It's going to be a lot of drilling. We're going to go through a lot of drill bits.
Cool.
Yeah. I'll have like carpal tunnel, like, a Popeye, deltoid. Yeah.
Awesome. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'd love to open up the conversation to anyone else in the audience. If you have any questions or comments for Deirdre.
I do. I just love to say, Deirdre, the work is so moving, really powerful.
Thank you.
I relate to all of it. Everything is so connected, and your work just completely is poetry, visual poetry. And always important, but like, we need this more than ever now, all this work. There's so many things I thought of as you showed your work, but the big piece and the Firefly Festival that you went to in Japan, you probably know this, but there's a firefly squid that lives around the Japanese islands. And I've made these, and Angela has exhibited them, but they're about 3 inches long, and they have like pinhole lights of this blue light, and they flicker like fireflies in the water. But you might want to see them.
Can you send me an image of yours?
They're amazing. Yeah.
I adore your work. I would love to see this. I will look up the squid itself, but I want to see your version.
I'll send you I have a folder on all the species that I work with. So yeah, I'll send you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'm a big fan of your work as well.
Thank you, Deirdre. But man, I'm such a lover of the sky, of the celestial world, as well as all of nature and the ocean. But the lights you did across your big piece with the lights at night of illuminating like the Japanese islands in Italy. So powerful. It's really moving, very deeply moving.
Thank you. That was crazy because I put in order to get that kind of luminosity, I used like tree rubber latex and put these little dots on the painting and let them dry. So I did all the stars in these dots with my wonderful Sydney. I couldn't have done it without her. And then once they dried, we then put a different glaze coat over that. Then we peeled off all those latex little rubber dots, and then there were these little wells that were made like a little kind of raised edge, and we then took these tiny little paintbrushes and hand painted different temperature yellows inside each of those wells, if you will.
Perfect.
Insane. I don't even know, can't even calculate how many hours went into it, but it took that in order to achieve that kind of sparkly effect,
Yeah, scintillating. Oh my God.
Scintillating. I like that. Okay, that's good.
Margarita's solo show is called Scintillare.
Yeah, it's a Latin root of the word scintillate. I love that word.
That's great.
Oh, I could talk to you forever. We'll talk sometime, but
we will.
Beautiful work.
Definitely.
Thank you, Angela, so much.
Yeah. So real quick before we end, I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but is there anything that you're preparing for, like any shows like that were coming up, or you have this virtual show you're working on with your class that people could see more of your work at?
Yes. So, well, as I said, the Box Heart in Pittsburgh is in October, and that will be a solo show based on a lot of the work that I've just showed you. And yes, then the brain visualization show will be at Lehigh University this fall, and it'll go for the entire semester, and that will most likely be a virtual show. And I'll post on my website under the news heading. I always post all of the, that season, really. I do it seasonally, and I also have a newsletter. So if you go to my website under the contact page, you could just put your email in there. And again, I only do 4 newsletters a year. I don't inundate people. And I just kind of keep you up to date. And then, of course, Instagram and Facebook. But then I think that the Temple University Commission, that will be unveiled in September. And in 2021, Penn State Abington, Scott and I will have a joint show there with some of these, the new sky domes and the cell domes.
Wow, got a lot going on.
And then there's one more that's in the works at Winterthur Museum. And that'll be a show in 2021 where they've asked some of the contemporary artists that have been a Maker Creator Fellow if they will respond to works in the collection and make specific work for a show. So that, I don't have the dates of that yet, but I think it's spring 2021 to do the Winterthur show. So lots of good things on the horizon.
That's great. So I put Deirdre's website in the chat if you guys want to find her on the web. Thank you so much for doing this. I love your work and I love seeing your new work.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I really appreciate it.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.